Hey everybody, how's it going? Today I wanted to share with you this really amazing game that just occurred in the TCEC Superfinals. Now, if you're unfamiliar with this tournament, this is the top chess engine tournament of the year, and this is the Superfinals. So we got our two finalists. It is Stockfish with the white pieces going up against Leela Chess Zero with the black pieces. And in this position, white came up with a 13-move combination that wins the game and involves a queen sacrifice. Now, you're perfectly welcome to go ahead and pause your video, try to figure out what happened, but you know what? If you're immortal and you need somebody to explain it to you, don't worry. I will be breaking down this game, how we got here, what happened from here, and all of the very fun action. Now, if you're unfamiliar with how these tournaments work, they are forced to play from a book position, so the computers don't get to make the first few moves by themselves. If they did, they would usually end up playing all sorts of really boring things, but this one, they had to start from the Scheveningen pawn structure, which is something that you can get out of the Sicilian defense. And we're not going to deep dive into any theory or anything. It's kind of a very solid-looking structure where black gets this kind of small pawn center, but it looks like it's controlling all of these squares, which is very true, so it could be a very solid way for black to play. One dangerous downside is that white has this potential to maybe play g4 in similar positions like this. Well, the book moves are not done quite yet. They were both forced to play bishop to e3, bishop to e7, queen f3, and after a6 castles, this is where both of the engines were able to make their first move on their own. And the reason for this is just to make sure that we get something exciting, a very interesting position. And I will say, this year's tournament has actually featured some really amazing openings. It's been a lot of fun to watch. Now, Leela comes up with queen to c7, and what's interesting to note is that Stockfish now making its first move plays pawn to g4, and this is an excellent sign that we're going to be getting something wild and aggressive. White is going to be pushing all these kingside pawns. Black is going to be playing b5 and trying to deliver this checkmate, and we'll see if one side is able to land a fatal blow. Now comes knight to c6. g5, kicking this knight away right away. Knight goes back to d7, and we see the recapture on c3. Black takes back with a queen. And here comes queen to g3, and this is an interesting moment of the game. White has identified this key focal point, the d6 square, and in this pawn structure, this is obviously going to be one of the weakest points for black, and white now is introducing the idea of playing bishop to f4 and targeting this pawn in order to try to force black into making some sort of concession in the center. Well, black first starts with b5, threatening to play b4 and remove this defender of the e4 square, so white takes time to play pawn to a3, preventing this from happening. Black plays rook to b8, again getting ready to play pawn to b4, with or without pawn to a5 on the board, and white, interestingly enough, does use this opportunity to play bishop to f4 and attack this square more times than black is able to defend it. And this forces black to play pawn to e5. And this is kind of an interesting idea because obviously you're forced to move the bishop again. Your bishop was on e3, it went to f4, it went back to e3. But in exchange for all of this time, you are able to get access to this d5 square. And now the knight is going to be able to easily hop in to that square. And that's exactly what we see after pawn to a5. Black is getting ready to push through with b4. We see the knight hopping in right away to this sensitive square. So the knight hops in to d5. This gets out of the way of any potential b4s that might be coming, because now when b4 comes, and this is what happened in the game, you are able to take back, and now set up this defensive structure with b3. Now, one of the most interesting things about this game is not just that white got this massive attack, it's also exactly how white sets it up. And white plays very prophylactically, stops all of black's ideas, and we'll even see it comes up with a very interesting idea of where it thinks this king ought to belong in this position. So knight to c5 is what was played in this position, and this actually makes quite a lot of threats. You can see that we're potentially exploiting this pin on the c file. Knight to b3 is a threat. Knight to e4 is a potential threat that we need to consider as well. But white is able to tactically defend all of this with this move, bishop to c4. This is obviously an excellent square for the bishop. It's an awesome diagonal. And this e4 pawn is actually tactically defended in this position, because if you were to take here, we would simply have this move queen to f3. And not only are we taking this knight, but we're also beginning to put some pressure on this focal point, which is the f7 square. But maybe even more importantly than that, if you were to just move away, not only do we have all sorts of crazy tactics that might work, also, may I remind you that these queens are in some sort of alignment here, so knight to f6 would simply be the winning move, and we would be able to just win the queen with the white pieces. So it's for that reason that here you are not able to take our e4 pawn, so black takes this time to play bishop to e6, a excellent square for the bishop, also keeping a little bit of control of f7, but this guy still not hanging for the same very reason, and white takes this opportunity to play pawn to h4. Again, if you take here, queen f3, followed by knight to f6, winning a queen is going to be the winning continuation for white. So after h4, we saw rook to c8. Okay, black understands all of these tactics very well. Black has now defended the queen, and that means we actually are threatening to take this e4 pawn. So white plays queen to f3, defends the pawn, and black plays bishop to e8. Okay, kind of some interesting remaneuvering that's going on in this one. But h5, white is just simply coming to get him. Black does decide to castle, and now we see a very interesting maneuver. Now, at some point, black is going to begin getting pressure on this A file. The rook's going to come in. It's going to swing all the way in. Maybe another rook or even the queen would be able to come on this A file, and white kind of anticipates this all coming in advance and plays king to d2, and the king is just simply running away to the other side of the board, which is why after the rook goes to a8, black is beginning the infiltration. The white king wants to be as far away from that A file as possible, and this is exactly what happens. The rook comes into a2. White takes the time to defend it, but this is the moment where you can see a lot of times in these positions when you castle queenside, you end up with a king that's stranded over here on the queen side, and that could have been actually very fatal because then rooks would be coming over and you might just be getting checkmated. It's an open file, so stay as far away from it as possible. The queen goes back to c8, and now queen to g2, getting on this G file, because potentially white is going to be breaking through, maybe with G6, maybe with H6. The king tries to run away, but G6 is played anyway, and this move is actually incredibly well-timed, which is not maybe a major surprise, but the problem from black's point of view now is that there's actually no real way to prevent this position from just kind of cracking open. Like, the thing that you would like to do is you would like to be able to recapture, and after this takes back, close this position somehow, play something like h6. But this will just simply invite way too many sacrifices on the h6 pawn. And here I believe you can actually take with whichever piece you want. But for example, rook takes h6, g7, all of a sudden we are just crashing through here. We're taking this, we're smashing in, even if you take back, we're taking here. This is all falling apart for black, and this should just be incredibly winning for white. So you're not able to take back and close the position, so black instead plays rook to g8, and this is its attempt at defending. Well, now we see another very slow, patient move, and we're going to see a lot of this. Like, it feels like there's an attack, and there's this sense that, you know, maybe you got to do something. Maybe you got to start taking. Maybe you got to start playing h6. Maybe you really got to bust in there. But, okay, white just takes the time to improve yet another piece. Now, the rook decides to go all the way back. It no longer needs to keep the pressure here. Black is beginning to think of playing some defense, and it goes back to the 7th rank, where maybe it will be able to control things. Well, now that you're not on my c-pawn, white again plays a very patient move, just takes this opportunity to improve this rook to the d file, since this is now an issue. Hard to come up with something for black. Bishop to h4, some sort of weird computer move. Okay, let's see. Knight to b6. And this is where we see kind of an interesting idea from white. And I think maybe at this point, the computer had already seen a little bit of the tactics that are about to start coming up in the future. Because knight to b6 attacks the queen, but at first sight, it's like, okay, what's the big deal? Queen to b6, I attack your knight. We keep some pressure on e4. You know, maybe we're threatening to win some pawns. What was the idea for white? White's idea is to take first on e6 and ask black a very difficult question, like how are you actually going to take back? And in the game, we saw it take back with a knight. If instead we were to see this recapture with the pawn, the problem here is that white has knight to c4, and it's not particularly easy to defend this pawn. Like, for example, you can't use your bishop, which maybe you would want to do, because now we're just breaking through, and we're able to play pawn takes h7, where, okay, what are you going to do if you move your rook, like literally wherever? You have some issues on the g7 square, and if you're taking with the king, this obviously is also super dreadful. Like, we're just crashing through here, we're playing pawn to h6, and this is not going to end well for black. So instead of that, we saw not the pawn recapture, but the knight recapture on e6, and they got to this position where the knight hops back to c4. So here, in this way, the knight has repositioned itself. It's now putting pressure on the d-pawn, and black needs to figure out what to do. So black plays knight to d4, and in this way shuts down the connection of the rook. But white plays Boom! Rook takes d4 and exchange sacrifice. The first of a couple sacrifices here, as we will see. And maybe intuitively this does kind of feel like it should be very dangerous because we get to this position, we're attacking the rook, we're on this super strong diagonal, and we've shielded ourselves against any checks by the opposing rook. So all in all, it does look like the kind of exchange sacrifice, like it feels like intuitively this is something that should potentially work. The rook goes to d7. The other option would have been to go to e7, which is targeting this pawn. But in this position, white would have pawn takes on f7. And the problem here is that if you are to recapture this way, h6. And in this way, we are able to put like literally all of our pieces here just crashing down on the g7 square. And something like this is intolerable for black. And something like this, white should just be able to crash through. So instead we saw the rook went to d7. But now queen to g4. And we're keeping an eye on this bishop. But now the rook goes over to e7. And this is where we started our adventure. This is the position where I challenged you. So you have one last chance to pause your video if you do want to try to figure out this next move. And it should be pointed out, obviously, this bishop is not hanging because the rook would be able to take on e4 and win the white queen. So that's not a real threat. So what is white going to do? Well, the threat is rook takes e4. So you know what? Let's continue the journey. King to f1. We're just going to keep getting that king out of the way. And now after rook takes e4, here is where all of the fun starts to begin. Because now the queen is attacked. Also, this bishop is attacked. What is white to do? Well, white played... boom! Queen takes e4. And the idea behind this beautiful queen sacrifice is that after black recaptures, we play knight to d6, and in this way we attack the queen, and we threaten a checkmate. Knight takes f7 would be checkmate, and at first sight this actually looks like it should be very dangerous, but black of course is also a supercomputer and is going to defend as optimally as possible, and black plays rook to d8, so now this is no longer checkmate. So we decide to take the queen instead, but after rook takes d4, you still need to know what the heck is going on. Like, we've sacrificed stuff, so you still need to see all the way to the end. Well, white here plays pawn takes f7. Now there's no time to recapture this knight because we would be promoting to a rook probably with checkmate. Obviously, you can make a queen as well. Black backs up with bishop to e7, guarding the queening square. And rook to j5. Look at that. Another very nice move, taking advantage of the fact that you can't take our rook because we would just be promoting immediately. And now the rook comes to e5, where it might be able to sneak in to the back rank. g6 is black's attempt. If black is able to just get this king to g7, if the king can get in contact with the pawn, black might be able to hold this together. So white plays a very brutal move here. Pawn to h6, and all of a sudden the black king is imprisoned. He's trapped. He's got no way out, and it's such a fascinating position because after we get the bishop going back to e8, obviously I should also point out that were you to go here, there is many ways for white to win. I think you just need to get to the back rank somehow, and now notice how these pieces are kind of clumpy. Like the bishop is now in the rook's way, and if you went back, not going to be easy to prevent me from checkmating you. So for that reason, the knight is actually immune in this position. So the bishop instead decides to go back to f8. The rook comes in to e5, and now this rook is just simply entering into the back rank. The king is still brutally trapped. So the bishop tries to take on h6. Rook comes in to d8. And the bishop needs to go back. And you had to see all of this to understand how you're still winning, because for just a moment, it looks like maybe black has actually set up a brilliant defense, because you take back, king goes to g7, and all of a sudden the rook needs to move, and black is going to be taking this pawn. But white had perhaps seen this far in advance and realized that the move knight to g5 is the winning move, because now, whenever you are to take here, we have this move, knight to e6, and that's exactly what happens. The king did take the rook, the knight went to e6, and after this recapture, we can clearly see that white is going to win this game. It got forked again immediately, and this is how this one ended. So I really wanted to share this one. It was a really cool game. It involved some really nice queen sacrifices, and if you liked it, please make sure you subscribe. All right, bye.